Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me and for the trust, and congratulations for organizing this type of congress. I also think it's very needed. I'm not working in the area of classical education. I'm a practitioner of certain academic education. And also my family works in education, so I have an overview of what has been going on in different schools for the last years. And these will be also my reflections and comments that I will present you. I have a small problem that I have to share with you. My glasses stayed somewhere else, and someone was very nice to lend me their glasses, so I do not see very well. So if there are any problems, it's because I do not see very well. The title of my speech is Classical Education Today, but I will be talking about it at the end of my speech. First, I would like to say what it is actually, because there are various definitions. There is also a subtitle, the essence, the genesis, structure and method, and the purpose. Let me start from the first point. I will try to control my time. I have only half an hour, so I will not be able to say everything that I wrote. So what is this classical education? How can we put it simply? It's a kind of a program and a process of teaching and upbringing of a student, a human being, whose purpose is to optimize the human nature, whose purpose is the full development of a human. According to many, classical education is, on the one hand, as was already mentioned today, an alternative for modern education, which has a rather utilitarian character, which is specified by the demands of job market. On the other side, it's also education upbringing of a human based on realistic anthropology. And its purpose is to develop a person as a human being, their reason, their will, and also feelings to some extent. It's about shaping such skills that will allow a person to recognize the truth and the good, and master, control the emotions. Already in antiquity, the ways of improving the intellect and a human will, were discovered. So the question arises, is there a need, and how should we use the long tradition of classical education? The real education, as we say, meaning full education of a human being, has a wisdom character. Its purpose, it should serve a human so that they can direct their lives responsibly, so that they achieve the purpose of their lives, so that a person fulfills themselves as a human. So wisdom is knowledge, which is the most important for a human being. It's the knowledge about the whole reality in the light of its first causes. At the moment, wisdom is understood differently. Education has rather encyclopedic character. Is that not enter deep into the reality? It does not have the vertical character, but rather a horizontal one. This knowledge is to be translated into technical usage and should be related in the possibility of reshaping, modifying the world. It's supposed to serve to fulfill the material needs of a person. We rather pose questions about certain education being useful. Young people ask, what is this school or education going to give them, and what will be their benefits from this knowledge? But what they mean are rather material benefits. For example, in the form of high salary or organizing themselves in the modern world. Obviously, this is understandable, but a human being cannot be reduced to their profession. They will not be satisfied in the civilization. A person should live up to their size as a human and their possibilities. They should discover who they are, where they come from, and where they are going. So a person should discover the truth about himself. We are, to some extent, the children of our times. We draw a lot of attention to the crisis in culture, and we try to find a remedy to this crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a crisis of culture, but of a human. This crisis is about the being lost in the world that is created by the human, because they do not even know the purpose of their activity anymore. Therefore, we are looking for the remedy for this human crisis. And according to others, this is education understood in classical terms. Because an educated person is a person who has real knowledge about the whole reality. Not only the material reality, but also a person who understands the reality and appreciates the wisdom, knowledge, because this knowledge shows them the way and the purpose of life. The classical education is to deliver this type of knowledge. It's a kind of entering into this mysterious world of nature and culture, of the human heritage. Also the cognitive heritage, all the achievements. The classical education is about a full development as a human, of a human as a person, their intellect, but also their will and their feelings. Can we reactivate classical education, bringing today? It is not completely absent from modern school, even though we live in the culture which is submitted to the to the influence of mass culture, which is full of entertainment. We still value the truth, even though we limit it often to the scientific knowledge about the nature, especially focusing on this knowledge being useful. We might say that the so-called scientific enlightenment is to replace the religion, is to provide the vision of the world of nature, where a person is only a part. Therefore, we are focusing on the practical side of the education. We do not appreciate the meaning of finding out about the truth for itself. We do not appreciate developing the potential of a student. Today, we promote a human being. We believe in progress, where the human being is the main purpose of the reality. So from the point of view of wisdom, we might say that a human lost their purpose and lost their way. Classical education, according to its supporters, it's a kind of a proper universal education, or the truthful education, so one that corresponds to a human as a human. So what is the genesis of the education? If we talk about it, we will put light into its essence. Education comes from Latin, but its essence is in the Greek culture, from Athens. It means the whole of activities and attempts in order to form a child morally and physically. The beginnings of this idea can be found in the works of Homer, as we know. Based on this, a certain pattern of ideal of a wise, mature person was created, of a righteous, virtuous person who is characterized by physical and mental beauty. This ideal can be achieved in human life through a proper education, the paideia, which will be discussed by other speakers. The theory of education and upbringing was actually created by sophists, who created a special education program covering rhetorics and dialectics. They also divided the education system into a primary and secondary. This concept was possible and necessary at the same time because sophists kind of distinguished a human being from all other entities in the nature. So they understood that a human being cannot be reduced to the world of nature. It's something else, and a different entity. So they accentuated the specific place of a human in the world. As we know, also Socrates contributed to the development of education because he was talking a lot about the morality, the meaning of morality in life. And his genius student, Plato, also said that a human being, despite of inborn inherited skills, needs also education for full development. This will liberate them from the prison of their senses and will direct them towards the real knowledge and the good, written in capital letter. The path to achieve this wisdom, according to Plato, is philosophy. So the love of wisdom, striving to achieve the wisdom. Then his student Aristotle drew the attention to the fact that education should correspond to the human nature, so who the human being is. And this human nature is the body and the soul, according to Aristotle. The human nature, and this was also discovered by the Greeks, is potentialized. It's developing over time. A person is not fully skilled from the beginning, so this knowledge needs to be updated. And this is the main task of education. The human nature of its own will not develop. A child left on the street is not going to develop. It's going to die. Therefore, a human being will not fulfill himself without education. Romans, on the other hand, took also this concept, Greek concept to a large extent, but they separated education and upbringing. The upbringing was left to the family, but this was already an idea of Aristotle, and the education was given to the teachers, so the institution of school. They also separated sciences whose goal was education, average education, including arithmetics, geometry, astronomy, and music, which were called artes liberales, so liberal sciences, because they were not made to bring money in the future. I'm sorry I missed one excerpt of my text because of my glasses. So they separated the sciences, grammar, rhetorics, and all from the science for elites, facultative, such as I mentioned before. Now this microphone is covering a bit the reality for me, meaning my text, but I hope I will manage. So sciences for elites like geometry, music, arithmetics, which were called the liberal sciences because they were not made to bring income in the future. Meeting Christianity with the Greek concept of education made the education more full by adding another dimension, because the Christians noticed that this pattern of education cannot provide full integral education because it does not contain the full truth about a human being, or it does not have enough tools to optimize human development. So due to Christianity, education receives a new dimension, new tools, and new tasks. It's open for the supernatural elements, for the God and eternal life, and that's how the classical concept, a full classical concept of education was born, and we are kind of missing it today. So it's the antique people who discovered the human nature potential, which requires cultivation, and I drew the attention to the proper content and ways of its development and fulfillment. There is also certain human concept behind the concept of education. Today, we forget about the existence of human nature. We try to make the existence of human nature less important, and also the program of human nature of being a fulfilled person, because the concept of nature has two meanings. One of them is that it's the whole world, the nature as a whole world, not philosophical, and then the other understanding is the nature of objects. So here, a person, a human being, has its nature, their nature. So they're equipped in certain potentiality and determined in a way for development. But the direction of this development depends on the human being, on their wisdom, their will. So we have to differentiate it here, because we do not deny the existence of nature, but we understand it rather as the whole world. And we forget this human nature, which was distinguished already by Greeks in antiquity. So the creation of the concept of nature, of a human being, was actually the basis of the creation of a science. So this is the source of activity. A dog is a dog because it's a dog of a nature. The same with a human being. So it's very important that sometimes when we argue about this concept of nature, we need to understand what we mean by saying nature. This was something additional outside of my text. Reducing a human being currently to their consciousness. There is also this educational conviction that we need to give more and more specialist expert knowledge in education. This is about memory, about programming the nature, so to say, as a computer. And then it's going to work. However, a human being is not an encyclopedia. Thank you very much for your help. So let me repeat. A human is not an encyclopedia type information. It's quite specific, not related. They do not provide a coherent picture of the world. These are not holistic knowledge that is needed by a human in order to understand the world. So accentuating, shaping intellect and exercising the memory is not a full adequate tool for its development. So classical education is a way for adequate growing up to achieve the full scope of development. Point number 2, the structure and method of classical education. In general, the method of classical education is teaching and upbringing, referring to the achievements of classical thought, Greek, Roman, and Christian. But it's all in the classical concept, European concept of education, the Christian concept of the European culture. And the guide in this way is to some extent philosophy and theology, which we are missing today. This education maintains certain stages of education, certain order, starting from a general education and moving towards expert professional education. So this is all maintained. The priority is human as a person, and then a human as an expert having a specific profession. It's about teaching a human how to read, how to write, how to think logically, and how to express their thoughts. But also appropriate behavior, sensitivity. It is also very important and kind of neglected currently. So classical education is humanistic education because it's about the good of all the people. Referring to the great achievements of culture, I still think that it's not enough to only shape the intellect. We need to create the will and the feelings, because it's the well-shaped mind. It's not enough to be a good human being who directs their life in a proper way. So what is important is to refer to this great European educational tradition, to its achievements. Tradition is the analysis of great works in literature, law, politics, theology, philosophy. So getting back to the sources, to the real sources, and not to summaries, as it is very often now. It's supposed to give a full education, the basis to understand the human world and to understand God. So we need to shape intellect. But the mind itself will not suffice a person to lead a decent life. We need to also form the will so that a person will want to shape their character. So it's about educating a person whose good activities are controlled by their reason, by their mind. So the life should be full of reason. As Socrates wrote, it's not worth living a mediocre life. It's also about reading and discussing great works. A teacher should be a guide and should lead and show the way of achieving the truth. The student needs to do it on their own, but they should be led by the teacher to reach the goal. So the teacher should show the path, the right path to the students. That's how it should be in school. The education should also teach the culture of being rational. And I also think that philosophy should be present there, because we will not understand anything without philosophy. Therefore, we try to develop the curiosity of the student, to show the value of truth, the love of the reality. I would like to underline this because it's very important. Because sometimes we need to show it, show the reality, the world to the students. It's the role of the parents as well. We need to learn the contact with the nature, because the nature is rational. It's not logics. Logics is secondary. Logics will not teach us how to think. It's not true. Teaching philosophy should be related with life. It should be mainly teaching philosophical thinking, not the history of philosophy. This is also secondary. History of philosophy is often treated as the cemetery of human thought. Students learn it because they have to pass the exam. It's rather about educating people who are able to think in a creative way, who understand the sense of discovering the truth, and truth is the reality that we discover. They understand the value of learning. We should also underline the authority of the teacher and rational thinking. All the reforms of education should be started not with programs, but with educating the teachers, because they are the most important here. And the teachers should be educated by the best universities. It's also about the permanent education. Before the war, each teacher was obliged to stay in contact with the university permanently. What is also important is to show on the educational level that the reason should lead the human being. The master is presenting the knowledge as a kind of an ideal, a model, shaping the will and feelings, sensitivity of a student as well. Third point, the purpose of classical education. The purpose of classical education is creating the will and the reason and the skills and the ability to control the feelings, and also directing those feelings to what is good for a human being, creating those acts of will. This is not a utilitarian goal, as often accentuated in education. It's about general and basic education that should be the basis for further education. The student should know how to learn, read, think logically, should have the basic knowledge about the reality and basic abilities, which should be the fundament for further education. These are also tools in which the student should be equipped. It's about common education. What's also important is to develop the memory, and classical education, as I said, as kind of an introduction at this basic level. It's about acquiring the skills to enter the world of human culture, its heritage, so that they can use it, so that they can become richer and develop, and to bring it further to next generations. So as I already said, in classical education, this basic way of thinking was in the philosophy. So students were taught how to analyze texts, how to perform synthesis of text, about the art of persuasion. And today, the classical education cannot be only about knowing classical languages, Greek and Latin. This is not enough. Reading classical books should result in a moral and intellectual development of the reader. We need to also add that classical education is not only based on reading great historical, philosophical works. It's also about reading those works in a systematic aspect, not historical aspects. So in the aspect of the universal content, timeless content, which shed light on our life, not on the life of Romans and Greeks. This is history, but those works contain information, a way of life that should help us better understand ourselves and better lead our lives. Because the content of those works are universal and timeless. They shed light on our current human problems. They can be helpful for people at any time, because they address a human being as a human being in a human within the human nature, and this a human being will always have similar analogical problems. Therefore, it's good to learn from the experience that was created over the years. This is about a human being and the purpose of life. An educated person, as we know, is interested in the whole reality, but he chooses and focuses their attention on what is objectively the most important, and this is what they also need to learn. Not everything, because we are not able to absorb all the information. The student should understand the surrounding world, should think independently, should not be manipulated, should know how to behave and analyze what's going on around them, and have their own opinions, and be able to discuss culturally. In classical education, we encourage students to independently look for the truth. So it's very important to shape this attitude. Without it, without this attitude, everything will fall. So this deep understanding of the world is very important, but we need philosophical knowledge for this. The philosophy should be understood classically in terms of its wisdom, and exact sciences which dominate in education, they do not provide general knowledge about the world, so they cannot be the basis of the world view of a human being. So the full philosophy should be more present in general education, because it's about the development, full development of a human being, and educational and intellectual and moral development. So we need to educate the humans and help them to develop themselves properly. It's about forming all the areas in which a human needs to gain competences. So when it comes to thinking, but also behavior, we need to also shape the awareness of belonging to a certain culture. Today, with this relativism of cultures, we need to show the greatness of the classical European culture, which is really exceptional, because this is the environment of our lives. We need to stress the importance of European culture as a pattern, important, showing the pattern of life, so that young people understand their world better, so that they can be more included into the social and religious life. It's all related with education, upbringing, and the upbringing aspect should also be important. So human freedom should be nurtured for the good, for the benefit of all of us. The human being also needs wisdom knowledge, so that they can follow this knowledge, try to gain this knowledge. So we need to work also on the will and sensory elements based on the heritage of previous generations. Therefore, a human being is subjected to the education, and the emotional sphere should be subordinated to the will, which is directed by the mind. So the human being should should be able to find the truth, and that's why we need to create the virtues, intellectual and moral capacities. When it comes to education, we need a certain pattern of being a fully developed human. And then we choose methods. According to classical education, this pattern might be human nature and its appropriate recognition. So who a human person should objectively become. A human being has a nature, and therefore human beings fulfill themselves. And current education is preparing students for professional life, preparing them to create tools, and making a student rather an object the human being is a subject of education. Education is a long-term process. The types of education can be various. Education has been forming generations for years in terms of knowledge and skills, but also sensitivity, moral and aesthetic. So we need to promote this education whose goal is the development of a human being, so that they become more of a human. Therefore, the main subject in Polish school is the Polish language, not physics or mathematics, because the content of those lessons are so important to the humanity. I said something obvious, so I'm surprised by the applause, because the content contribute most to the humanization of the human being, so to the development of a human being as a person. I think I'll not be able to say everything, but let me just finish this passage. Education has a lot of functions, but it's limited to gaining professional skills. It's like goods which are put on sale. That's how the parents choose the schools for their children and pay a lot of money for those schools. Full education is not only professional education, but also upbringing, educating a human, helping a human to find a purpose and a sense of their lives, because here is where we get lost. So a person needs to get skills to live a decent life. It should be the light on the path of our life. It's the human being who will be choosing, but they need to see it first. So education is a form of presenting knowledge and skills. The education is a carrier of a human life. And we call this life culture. We call it culture. So culture and civilization distinguish human education, which is leading a human being to the full humanity. And it's the school where this knowledge should be presented. The school should provide what is the most precious, most important in the heritage of our culture. If it's important in culture, then it should be also important in schools, and it should not be marginalized. So here is where we decide what is the most important in our heritage. The school in the Greco-Roman education was the basis. They discovered that a human being needed education and upbringing, which enabled them for optimal development of their humanity. School understood this way was a priceless deposit of European culture for many years. The Greek school, which was the start of it, the beginning of it, was aiming at creating a free human. In the classical culture, freedom is understood positively. And if I am to choose, then I should be able to choose what is important, the freedom to what. So the educational problem is about gaining wisdom and certain skills to understand freedom in a positive way. And for this, we need classical education. I cannot fully finish my speech because my time is up. I'm very sorry. I thought I could speak longer because I was the first, but unfortunately not. But thank you very much for your attention.